Thank you, Kate. Thank you.
Oh dear, oh dear.
It's great to be here. You guys all having a good time at Abbey Road on the River? I see some Weakling shirts. They knocked it out of the park yesterday. The jukebox, all of the artists, the Petty. Did you guys like the Petty Hearts? First time I've seen them. They were amazing. And a lot of other entertainment for you tonight. We have America on the stage tonight at 8 o'clock. I believe our guest is going to introduce them on the stage because they recorded many albums together. I'm real excited to meet Jeff Foxworthy. Aren't you guys? I've got so many questions about his routines. What's that? Oh, Geoff Emerick. Of course we're here for Geoff Emerick. So I'm going to give him a nice introduction. I've had a chance to get acquainted with him a little bit. As Kate mentioned, we have a lot of the books here, which we'll happily autograph and have for sale after the show. So, and even if you have your original book, that's fine. Jeff has asked that you don't bring any Beatles memorabilia, Sgt. Pepper albums, things like that, hats, stuff like that, because A, it delays everything that we're doing, but also he wants to kind of focus on the book, and he's got these baseball shirts, which are really nice. So is that cool, you guys, with that? Because it also slows the line down if everybody's got 10 Sgt. Pepper albums and that kind of thing. So anyway, the story with Jeff is at the age of 15, he brazenly applied for a job at EMI's Abbey Road Studios, and he went in for a very nervous 15-year-old interview with his dad, and believe it or not, he got a call back, a nice letter a couple of days later, or a call back, and he went in, and he was hired, and within his first couple of days of working at EMI's Abbey Road Studios, the Beatles were there recording their first single with their final lineup of Ringo Starr, and they were recording Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You in September of 1962. So that's around the time when he started, and he worked with them all the way through Abbey Road. He had a brief hiatus, which we'll talk about when we have the interview. But in addition to recording the Beatles, he's worked with America and Elvis Costello and so many other amazing artists. He recorded Stuck in the Middle with You, Steeler's Wheel. That was one of his records. The great Jerry Rafferty, and many, many other songs. But with the Beatles and on his own, he won 4 Grammy Awards. He won a Grammy for Best Engineered Recording for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. He also won a Grammy for the engineering of Abbey Road. He won a Grammy with Paul McCartney for Band on the Run, and then he was given a special Grammy in 2003, a Technical Special Merit. So he's a 4-time Grammy Award winner. Would you please welcome Geoff Emerick to the stage?
Hi, Geoff.
How are you, my friend?
I'm fine. I hope this doesn't fall off. No, I don't know whether. I think it is. I think it's. It is.
Okay.
Greg, is this on? It is on, yes. Okay.
It is on. It is on.
Oh.
Well, welcome. How are you enjoying your first Abbey Road on the River?
It's fantastic.
Now, you're a guy that saw the Beatles, and I'm trying to remember, you did see them play live, not just in the studio, right? Did you ever see a concert?
Yes, at what was Finsbury Park Astoria,
okay,
which became the Rainbow.
Right.
And I saw them play live there if you could hear them, but you couldn't because of the screams.
What we needed was a good sound engineer at that concert.
Yeah, I guess
you were there as a fan.
Yeah.
So how do you compare, and listen, I know this is a loaded question, compare seeing the Beatles, 40, 50 years ago to seeing these bands that have been on stage with the jukebox and the Weaklings, and some of them have their own, strange interpretations, but
right.
Is it troubling to you, or is it welcoming, and we're keeping the Beatles music alive?
No, it's welcoming. I mean, yesterday I saw a couple of bands, and it was in fact a little awesome, because a lot of the, and I don't want to offend anyone here, a lot of the Beatle cover bands now are fairly old people singing, right? And
we don't have any old people here, so don't worry about that.
But yesterday there were a couple of bands with really young guys in there, and they sounded really, really good. And it might be one of those situations where one of those bands might be the new Beatles. Whoever knows, Right.
Do you think there is a group that has come after the Beatles that has been, okay, we're not going to say better, but got your attention as that type of band?
No, not really.
No?
No.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good day, you guys. Have fun. The shuttle is outside. So.
No, it's more than just, it was one of those things that happened. I mean, it's all the way the songs were constructed in the studio, the way some mistakes became good parts of the arrangement, sure. and it was a whole situation of how those whole songs were developed in the confines of a studio. Because there were no demos per se then. There was no cassettes, there was nothing to actually come in with a demo. So it was all started in the studio, on the studio floor.
At least the first couple of albums, right? Because later on, did they bring little? I know that I would read in Mark Lewison's book. Oh, they did. Paul did a little thing to show you how Michelle was going to sound, or something like that. Or do you? But most of the time, they just came in and they said to Ringo or George, "Here's what we worked up."
Well, yeah, I mean, they routined it because they basically came in with a lyric, and John and they met round Paul's house, in Cavendish Avenue before the session, and maybe discuss it briefly.
We've all climbed up in the fence and tried to look over it.
So
I'm not alone.
Right, so then they'd come in with the lyric and an idea. So we'd spend so many hours, maybe electric guitar, and piano, and obviously, I'm not sure about the bass at this situation because Paul was getting into a...
You say in your book that he liked to do it after because he really liked to play around all the guitar.
Because of the classical, he used to like to go away and spend days working out really great bass parts. So we do, Ringo do a rhythm for the new song. It all started with a lyric, right? And maybe some of the magic was because John was like he's not an aggressive person, but he's like aggressive, I guess, right? So,
as long as he's not aggressive, I'm with him on that.
But Paul was like the romantic. So the combination of those two opposites made the magic that came out of a lot of those songs, because, John would come in with a verse, but he wouldn't have the choruses, and Paul would say, well, why don't you do this on the choruses? So it would be completely anti what John would ever think of. So you'd spend like the next 4 hours trying to work out the instrumentation on the tracks, and you'd realize it's not working for the song. So then where it was going to be piano, it's now harpsichord. Where it was electric guitar, it's now acoustic guitar. And then so finally, and it'd be a different drum rhythm for Ringo. And then maybe by 10 o'clock at night maybe, we've locked into a rhythmic pattern and instrumentation on the song. And we do many takes, probably till 3 or 4 in the morning, and review it the next day, and that became the basic master rhythm track for those songs. The magic being, as I said before, it all happened from the studio floor, it created from nothing.
Or in some cases, you completely start the record over a couple of weeks later, right?
Yes.
So like the Beatles anthology, we're going to go back. Let's go back to the very beginning, and we just talked about how you got hired at EMI, and your first day, you probably didn't see the Beatles on your first day, but
no, I didn't.
When did you first become aware of them, that there was somebody recording down there? And for you, was it just, there's another group down there, or how did they get your attention?
No, the attention was coming from the younger staff at EMI Studios, because I started in June, I think it was June, I can't quite remember the month now, but 2 days later, this band from Liverpool was coming down. All the young guys in the studio were talking about this band from Liverpool. And I said, well, first of all, this was 2 days after I started. So I said, and I've got to learn the routine and the ropes of my new job, which is to be a button pusher, which is operating the tape machines. So I said, can I sit in on that session, with this band from Liverpool, which I did, which is when they cut the first version of Love Me Do. And I think it was How Do You Do It? Was it they were supposed to be recording that day? And so anyway, they wanted to record one of their songs. So I didn't understand a lot of the protocol at EMI Studios, except I realized at the time, George Martin was always referred to as like the headmaster as far as they were concerned, and it was like a school trip. But looking at those 4 boys down in the studio, they were sort of having a little bit of fun, and I didn't realize at that time that you didn't really do that. I mean, as I said, at that time I didn't really realize that you didn't do that because it was very regimented, but these guys were having a laugh and stuff around the vocal mics and so forth. And it was only like a few weeks later I realized that they were different from anyone else because they were like fun-loving mop tops, So that was my first impression. And I think at that time they had their slim knitted ties and their suit. And I think Brian made them wear the suits as well on that.
Were you able to eavesdrop on the banter? Because, they always tell the story, George Martin says, if you hear anything you don't like, let me know. He says, well, Statos, I don't like your tie. They had that.
Well, no, yeah, I know. I mean,
that
was to me, that was it, because George Martin and I had, what happened, because when I was a button pusher, I was on a lot of George Martin's other sessions with other artists. And George and I had the same sense of humor, whereby something funny would happen in the studio, but because it's so regimented, you wouldn't openly laugh at something. So George and I used to look at each other and inwardly grin to each other, So we had a great relationship. And the tie thing, I think, was George Harrison said, didn't he? And because of George's sense of humor, that's written as by one of the reasons why he signed them because of that moment. He wasn't too sure about whether to sign them or not. And then when George Harrison made that quip to him, we were all on the same wavelength on the sense of humor thing. So I think on the basis of that, he was attracted to them because George did middle of the road records and comedy records. This is like the first rock and roll band
Dudley
he
Moore
ever
and
had.
Peter
That's
Sellers.
right. Yes.
So, but also George Martin at that time probably felt like I need to present them with a song. The Mitch Murray, how do you do it? And the bands don't write their own music; they just come in and record. I mean, everybody from Sinatra forward.
Right.
So then they rejected "How Do You Do It," which it was a #1 song for Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Yes, of course it was. But and I think was it Mitch Murray wrote that?
Mitch Murray, right?
But that was a swipe at George for that because I mean George John actually sort of we don't want to record this.
But they did do
right?
a version of it, which came out on an anthology.
Yes, but yes, right. But
Lackluster, right?
But that also came out that version because that's Ringo drumming, and then when it was re-recorded 2 weeks later, I think it was, and Ron Richards actually produced that session, which was George's assistant, and Andy White played drums, and Ringo was in the control room, and Ron got upset to the fact that he felt sorry for Ringo, and he said, "Go and play tambourine." And so I think on that first version you hear tambourine on that rhythm track.
Right. Well, that's how you can tell "Love Me Do" the difference in the
that's
"Love
right.
Me Do.
So then I don't know how many years later it was because it lingered with Ringo for a long time, and he resented the fact that what had happened. Thank you. They reissued that first version of that recording with Ringo drumming, and I don't know what year that was, and that now became the definitive one because that was Ringo drumming on "Love Me Do." You might know more.
Well, it's always confusing to the fans because in the anthology, Ringo says it doesn't matter because I'm on the album.
Right.
But I think he's on the single.
Yes.
So that's why the people that play the album think they're hearing Ringo, but they're really not. So
they switched it at some point.
Right, but even with the "Please Please Me" album, it still has the Andy White version.
That's
if
right.
they're going to be true to the original mix.
Yes.
But that's one thing we can talk about later is in the Beatles anthology. Even the Beatles didn't know the history. I think there's that section where George says, "Didn't we play Shea Stadium only once?" Oh, we over to you, Paul. So their memory. I mean, I think as fans, our memory is probably because we fixate on these facts and trivia all the time.
Yeah, I know.
So I just wanted to, you say that as more than a button pusher. Tell us what is the difference, just to bring it back to the beginning, what's the difference in a recording engineer and a George Martin, a producer? Do any of your duties overlap, or are you strictly, and tell us what your job is?
The producer's job in those days was to find the song from a music publisher, as with Mitch Murray, right, for a band,
sure.
and he'd find an arranger if there was an orchestra involved. He'd book the studio because he worked for normally a record label. He'd book the studio, the engineer to record it, and he'd oversee. It's like making a film. You get the best cameraman, you get the best this, the best that, the best lighting man. So you bring this team of people together to record a song. But from my point of view, I never got into this job. From a technical point of view, it was from the age of like 7, the love of music, right? And I wanted to be involved with creating music in some way. So we weren't allowed, as far as I was concerned, when you became a balance engineer, as we said then in those days, you're like painting a picture with the tonalities and the music that you're hearing from the microphones, and you build up this picture. You got a dominant color. You think, well, I think the harp should be a bit brighter to complement that sound, and so forth. So that was the job. So you're the guy that's in charge and making all the sounds to actually merge and come out as a picture of sound.
But it's different than today because with Pro Tools or even with the mixing board, you can set the EQ on the board, but you couldn't necessarily do that then,
No,
right?
all I had then was basically an 8-input mixing console. There were 2 faders that would accommodate 2 4-way little mixers with no EQ. The only EQ on the desk was treble and bass, which we weren't even allowed to know what that was. We weren't. The technical thing. There was like a department of technology in EMI studios in those days, and even if you wanted to move like a jack socket plug from that one to that one, we weren't allowed to do it. So even though there's an orchestra in the studio, no matter what, you have to phone up the maintenance department. And you'd hear them go running down the stairs, and they'd come and do the can you change that? And they wouldn't let it run out again. And that was the system then. So the technology thing for me never happened. There was no plugins. All the sounds that happened on Beatle records, you know, I created, I guess, metaphorically by using bits of string and tape and glue. I mean, that's all I could do, and just overload and abuse the equipment. That's all I could do at that time, you know, because they weren't demanding. They were just asking for something different every time on every track we recorded from Revolver onwards.
You know, as a Beatle fan, I know you're a mono guy. I love the stereo mixes because as a fan, you could turn it all the way to the right and you could hear just the vocal and you could hear John breathing or laughing. If you turn it all the way to the left, you have the karaoke version of the Beatles. So was that done for a specific reason, split the music and voice?
Well, that's all we could do because we were on 4-track, don't forget. Although...
well, not for Please Please Me.
No, the Please Please Me thing, because I think, I don't know what point that happened, because they were like twin-track recordings.
Right.
They were the only reason they were on twin-track was the fact, although most of the things were just mono quarter-inch tape, what you could do, you could put the basic rhythm track on one track and the vocal on another track and get the right sort of reverb vocal sound and mix them together. On a sort of twin track to mono.
And that's how you would make the mono mix. You could pull the music track down or something?
Yeah.
Right.
But normally before that was like something that was like above recording mono. This is like the first multi-track, but it's only 2 tracks. Because normally it would just be recorded mono. And it was Norman Smith, the original engineer, who, you know, because I used to work on Norman's sessions as an assistant, we used to get on you know, well together. And Norman sort of experimented like that a few times, and I think he was the one that instigated the fact, well, let's do it twin track rather than go straight to mono and not be able to adjust the balance afterwards. And if you wanted to increase normally, so the whole music track is recorded live, basically, as She Loves You was, believe it or not. So when you come to the chorus parts and you want to strengthen the vocals, you copy that tape onto another record tape.
And sing to it, right?
And you sing to that piece of tape, but to preserve the virgin recording, you used to edit those bits back into the master recording. So normally the master recording was the virgin recording, but then it went to the copy of the virgin recording and then back to the virgin recording. But what's happened on some of the reissues, because of the azimuth, there's something called azimuth, and you hear some of these playbacks where the azimuth was different depending on what machine.
So you can hear the edit go by, you're saying?
No, you can hear the top end disappear or come back
gotcha.
up.
I think it happens on She Loves You, actually.
Yeah.
I can hear the change.
Because She Loves You was like that. Because that was the day that the fans broke into the studio. I don't know whether you were going into that.
Well, please.
So on this particular instance, on She Loves You, we always think it was Mal Evans that used to let the fans know the Beatles were recording at EMI Studios in St John's Wood. So suddenly they've got a photo shoot, which was outside of the echo chamber at the back of number 2 studio. And they had a photo shoot, but I think it was a Saturday I can't remember, I think it was Saturday. So there's a photo shoot happens, but suddenly over the period of 2 hours, there's like 300 fans outside that studio. And there's like 2 policemen, one at each gate. And suddenly they burst through the gates. And they ran amok into the studio. They were hiding in cupboards. They were going to mastering rooms. They were going to other people's studios. There were 300 girls just running around completely wild. So we're in our number 2 studio on that particular day.
You hadn't even released She Loves You yet, right?
No, that's the day we're recording it.
Yeah, so how did they even know that this was going on?
No, because Mal Evans had told them that we're recording, right? Right, so...
That was the early days of Twitter.
Yeah, so, no, that's right, yeah. So anyway, so what happened was, so we're locked into number 2 studio, you know, and suddenly they broke into number 2. They were everywhere in the building. I mean, it was just chaos. All the janitors and everyone else were just trying to get these kids out of the cupboards and the rooms and throwing them out. And suddenly they broke into our studio. But the funny thing was, like 5 girls ran for Ringo. And so anyway, it was Neil Aspinall, I think, who calmed everyone down, and we started to record the record. And basically, if you listen to She Loves You, there's so much energy on that record, and all it is basically a live recording. The only thing that was overdubbed, I think, was some extra voices in the choruses. So that's why in She Loves You, you hear that energy level, because we had so much fun and everything that day, you know.
I read that when they did the Beatles anthology, they found 2 skeletons hiding in. So they didn't get everybody
it's
out.
funny when looking back on this, how you know, how all this developed from nothing. I mean, we're here today, like what's from 1962 now to 2018, and we're still discussing those wonderful sessions, which of course they were wonderful sessions, but we didn't realize how wonderful they were at that time.